Footage has emerged from Gaza, apparently showing dozens of Palestinian men detained and forced to strip by Israeli forces. The men are seen sitting cross-legged or kneeling in several different locations and being transported on the back of military vehicles. These pictures were filmed in northern Gaza, not far from Gaza City. Israel has not confirmed who the men are, but says it is interrogating individuals. Israeli army spokesman Daniel Hagari said, and I quote, "We are investigating to see who is linked to Hamas and who is not." Earlier, I asked our correspondent Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem what more she knew about the images of the detainees.
Well, as you said, the Israeli army wouldn't confirm those pictures or videos, but they've been circulating since Thursday on social media, showing dozens of men stripped down to their underwear, with some of them their hands bound and guarded by soldiers. These are videos and photos. Some have been geolocated to the northern area, parts of them to Beit Lahia, which is a town in northern Gaza. And some families and relatives have actually identified on social media, at least, their relatives on on some of the photos. And we understand that one of them is a local correspondent for a London-based Arabic newspaper. They have put out a statement in this regard. But again, the army would just say that they have arrested hundreds of men, interrogating them as well over recent weeks.
Separately, Tanya, there has also been pressure on Israel to allow more aid into Gaza. How is Israel responding to that?
Well, the pressure has been mounting not just to get more aid into Gaza, but also for more protection of civilians, mainly by the United States. But also the United Nations is saying now that it's incredibly difficult now with the expanding ground operations also towards the south, where many Palestinians have been displaced to from the north. The situation is becoming very dire there as well, with heavy bombardment going on there as well. We also had some rocket fire coming out from Gaza today, but there is some talk and some reports that Israel might consider to use the Kerem Shalom crossing for screening of humanitarian aid that is usually coming in on trucks through the Rafah crossing, which is the crossing with Egypt. Israel had closed its two crossings, one in the north that is mainly for people to go through in the past, and the one Kerem Shalom in the south for goods. But so there might be less pressure on the crossing in Rafah. But having said that, because of the heavy fighting reported in the south, humanitarian organizations are saying they have difficulties to get the little aid that is coming in, or the aid that is coming in to people, for example, also to the central areas, to the northern areas, and also in the south, because it's extremely difficult to distribute aid. And we heard the UN's General Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, also saying that we do not have a humanitarian operation in southern Gaza anymore. We can't call it like this anymore, because there's no safe space for people, and also no safe space to distribute the aid.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Tanya Kramer in Jerusalem, thank you so much. The tiny coastal town of Al-Mawali was declared a safe zone by Israel's military after it told some 430,000 residents of Gaza's second-largest city, Khan Yunis, to evacuate. But many displaced Gazans who arrived at the 10-square-kilometre patch of land say they found no humanitarian aid.
Another Palestinian school that's become a mass displacement camp. Labeled in Israel's evacuation plan as a humanitarian zone, many who moved here were promised better conditions.
They said this place would be the safest, that it would be a dump for humanitarian aid. But of course, that's not true at all.
Those sheltering at the school say they've mostly had to fend for themselves, describing a complete absence of all utilities.
We're all right, but there are no services here. There's no running water, there's nothing. We're sleeping outside in the cold.
More than 2 months into the war, Gazans here say they're exhausted of living in inhumane conditions and not having access to medical care.
We ask international actors to provide aid, access to electricity, food, water, so that we can live in peace here. We call on global powers to stop this war in Gaza.
Until then, many here in Al-Mawali are trying to survive with whatever means they have.
The United Nations Secretary General is pushing for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. Antonio Guterres told the UN Security Council that people in Gaza are being moved around like human pinballs. He said it's impossible for aid workers to get to people in need. The Council is to vote on a draft resolution calling for a ceasefire and the release of hostages held by Hamas. The UN chief says international security could be at risk.
There is a high risk of the total collapse of the humanitarian support system in Gaza, which would have devastating consequences. We anticipate that it would result in a complete breakdown of public order and increased pressure for mass displacement into Egypt. I fear the consequences could be devastating for the security of the entire region.
Now let's bring in our correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber in Washington, D.C. Benjamin, give us the context of this vote. Why is it happening now?
People in Gaza stare into the abyss. That's what Secretary General Antonio Guterres said earlier today at this meeting of the Security Council that is happening in New York. He stressed that the humanitarian system and the humanitarian operations in Gaza are collapsing. He also used the word saying that we are at a breaking point with devastating consequences. And he also stressed this complete lack of assurances for us. And that's something that we also heard in that report and also heard from our colleague Tanya Grema there. Guterres said that the threat for our staff is unprecedented. And he said that this would have devastating consequences if these strikes in Gaza continue. Just to give you a few numbers on why this vote is taking place now, he said that reportedly more than 300 education facilities, 88 mosques, 29 hospitals have been hit, and more than 60% of housing in Gaza is destroyed or damaged. So why is this vote taking place now? Antonio Guterres invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter, which says that the Secretary General may inform the Council, there's 15 members, of matters he believes threaten international peace and security. So this is something that gives him an important additional power, since the real power of the UN is held by its 193 member nations, but especially the 15 countries that serve the Security Council. And that's where this vote we'll expect to have a vote on that later on today.
So Guterres thinks international peace and security is under threat. What do the Security Council members think? Will the vote pass?
So one of the 15 members of the Security Council, the United Arab Emirates, the only Arab country, has pushed for a draft resolution demanding an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. This is not the first time that there's a vote like this in the Security Council. The war was in October that the US vetoed, because for a resolution to be adopted, you need 9 out of 15 members of this council to vote in favor, and none of the 5 permanent members to veto the resolution. And that's exactly where we don't know how the US will vote. We can expect that this might be just another veto, and that's something that Secretary Blinken also said yesterday. It was a press conference with Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, David Cameron, and there Blinken once again stressed that it's important. He said that he believes the assurances that Israel is giving, but he also said that's different between what they're claiming that they want to do and how the situation on the ground actually looks like. And that's also something that we heard in the report there. So we can imagine that the US might again veto this resolution.
If that's the case, why hold a vote?
That's a very good question. Many are saying that Guterres is showing that the UN can act, that the UN can do more. we don't see why it should be any different to the situation in October that was already catastrophic. We see the rhetoric is changing, we see pressure on Israel increasing, we see also Israeli officials being pressed on what they say, what they do actually. And that was something really interesting also during yesterday's press conference that I just mentioned with Secretary Blinken and David Cameron, because a Reuters journalist pressed Secretary Blinken asking about this new investigation that showed that an Israeli tank crew fired and killed the Reuters journalist. But Secretary Blinken dodged the question, saying that they still believe in Israel assurances of protecting journalists in the war zone.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks so much for joining us today, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber.